Okay, morning everyone. Welcome to this morning's AGP webinar. Thanks for taking the time to attend. Obviously, busy and stressful times for everybody. I'm Lisa and I'm from the AGP office administration team, so helping to facilitate for Howard, who will be our expert delivering the webinar this morning. I'll pass you over to him shortly, but just before, if we can go through a few housekeeping rules. Most of you have done, but if you haven't got, can you please put your microphone on mute just to avoid any interference or background noise this morning. There will be a question and answer session later in the webinar, at which point you can obviously switch these back on, or if you prefer, you can ask any questions on the chat facility on the side, and Howard will try to answer as many of these as possible. Just to check that your chat facility is working and for us to get a good idea of who's on with us this morning, can I just ask you all to type your name into the chat facility for me? Some of you have got obvious names coming up, but we've got a few that I don't know what names there are on there. So if you could just type your name in the chat thing for me there. If you need any support during the webinar, I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have any problems, please just ask. It is being recorded, which just helps us to collate any questions or comments which we may miss during the live webinar. If anyone has any questions or concerns about this, please let me know. Following on from the webinar, you will receive 2 emails from myself. We will require you to sign a digital registration form for the Welsh Government. So you will receive an email via HelloSign, which is our e-signature platform, with a link. It literally takes less than a minute and is really easy to follow. This just allows us to confirm to Welsh Government that the webinar took place and how many people attended. So it's really important that you sign this, as we will be chasing any missing forms. You'll also receive an email with a link to 2 surveys to provide feedback to us. Obviously, these have been kind of thrown together for some of them. So any feedback that we get to improve or get further information, then obviously this would help us and our presenters as well. So could you please complete these? So now can I just remind you all, if you could just type in your name into the chat facility for me, and I'll hand you over now to Howard. Thanks, Howard.
Thank you, Lisa. I always worry actually when somebody introduces me as an expert, because I'm sure you've all seen it broken down. An X is a has-been and a spurt is a drip under pressure.
Oh.
I think facilitator would be good. And as Lisa said, thank you for joining us on this beautiful morning and giving us your time. I realise how busy you are, but judging by how many are here, there's certainly a recognition that we need to lead and manage our people in a slightly different way, I guess, now that many of them are working remotely. It made me smile yesterday when I saw the Financial Times headline which said, business practices undergo seismic change with flexible policies becoming standard. So I guess for all of us, since the lockdown, our people are now working at home, they're working remotely. And this webinar is really about providing you with some practical advice to enable you to engage and motivate your people while you're not with them. So the topics we're going to explore are leading remote teams. It makes a difference when we obviously can't see our people, when we're not with them in the office where we might normally be. And maybe it's good practice anyway, but maybe when people are remote, it's almost making sure that we lead even more effectively than we do when they're with us. Very important part is going to be managing performance. I'm very fortunate. I've worked with a number of clients who are perhaps in the forefront of flexible working and home working. But even in those organizations, managers find it very difficult when they haven't got their people with them or in front of them to be confident, I guess, and to trust people that they're actually doing the work that they hope they are doing. So we'll talk about some ideas for managing performance. Also about engaging and motivating people who are working at home. I think we're all finding it challenging. I'm a regular remote home worker myself, but this last fortnight has been very different because I guess it's a kind of forced situation which people are finding very uncomfortable. On that note, also cover keeping remote workers' well-being high And not only thinking of our people, but thinking of yourselves as well. It's great to see that on the webinar today, we have many founders, directors and leaders of organizations. And I think sometimes there's a kind of expectation that because you're leading the organization, you're not subject to all the same stresses, worries, concerns that everybody else is. So when we chat about the kind of things that we should be making sure our people do, remember they apply to us as well. As Lisa said, we'll summarize with some takeaways and pick up any questions. And if we can't answer them now, certainly get back to you. I've also added some useful links at the end of the presentation where you can get lots of information. And I'll mention as I go through some resources that we have available, which you might find useful. So relax, enjoy the next 40 minutes or so, and then we'll answer any of your questions. Pop them up on chat as we go along. Okay, thinking about leading remote teams, I guess we could have spent a whole day just talking about leadership, but I've tried to focus on three specific areas: clarity, consistency, and communication. And these have certainly come out of our own work with clients over the last 2 or 3 weeks. The need for clarity. People, I guess, when they're not in the office, when they're not with other people, when they can't see what's going on, need to be confident that they're doing the right things and that there is some clarity despite the kind of situation we find ourselves in. We know how difficult it can be when we're face to face sometimes, to make sure that everybody is actually pulling in the same direction and singing from the same song sheet. And that illustration there, I think, is a good one. I think what our people are looking for is us as leaders to make sure we are sharing with them the big picture. I don't mean the big picture as in what's going on with the pandemic. I mean the big picture in terms of what's going on in your environment, with your markets, with your customers, with your competitors and comparators, and the fact that you've got a handle on where the organization sits in that bigger picture and what your plans are, to maybe remove and mitigate any constraints, but also to take advantage of any opportunities. People need to feel confident in your capability as leaders, that you know what you're doing and you know where you're going, and you can communicate that to them in very simple and straightforward terms. They also need, I think, more so than ever, to understand the golden thread, to be able to see a line of sight between what they're doing every day and what the organization needs them to do. Sadly, in the last fortnight or 3 weeks, we've had some clients, and I think a word that came to my ears yesterday was somebody said that they had some dissent in their people. And when we explored what the reason was, they had some people who were furloughed. They had some people who were still actually working in the workplace, and they had some people who were working remotely. What they realized was, I think, that they hadn't well enough communicated or made it clear why certain people were working in certain ways and how it all fitted into where the organization was going. So I think that's a lesson for all of us, is to make sure that we can see very clearly the link between the individuals, their teams, the kind of work we're asking them to do, and why they're working in a particular way. I think we need to make sure that we focus on our individual values, and not only those, but some of you in your organizations, in your companies, will have very explicit values, which you'll have written down, perhaps you'll have developed with your people over time. I think one of my colleagues often says it's at times like this that values are really tested. Are they just fine words, or are they really about the behaviors that we ourselves exhibit and the behaviors we want our people to exhibit? And thinking about that one as well, think about your culture. Maybe it's something that, again, we don't think about often enough, but sometimes defined as the way we do things around here. And every single one of you as organizations and even teams within organizations has a very unique culture. And some of the areas of culture which are particularly, I think, important at this stage are maybe the two in the top left there, the stories and the rituals and routines. Stories, whether they are mythical, whether they're legends, they're often positive, not always. I have a client in Cardiff who has been around since just at the end of the Second World War. And one of the stories they often talk about is how the founder started the business, having been demobbed, in order really to provide job opportunities for other soldiers like himself. It's a very powerful story, and it's the kind of story that people are now reinforcing in this current climate. As for rituals and routines, we've all got them in our organization. They will be impacted by people perhaps not working together. A couple of examples I've picked up in the last couple of weeks as one organization I work with in Swansea, and normally they work in an open plan office, and apparently every day when Radio 2 has a Popmaster quiz, it's not unusual for people to have a coffee, sit down and compete in that quiz. Now they're able to do that online, so they've managed to continue with that routine and ritual, but in a very different way. I've also worked with a legal firm in Cardiff, and apparently every Friday evening it's drinks time, and they're still having drinks time on a Friday evening, but they're doing it via Zoom, and people are having their own tipples while they have a chat and kind of have a relax at the end of the week. So it's important for us, I think, as leaders to think about those rituals, those routines that are important to our people, part of our culture, and try and find different ways of doing them. Second area is about consistency. Maybe thinking about that issue of people not being happy or not quite understanding why things are happening the way they are. Unfortunately, and I think it'll happen more and more when people are working on their own, conspiracy theories emerge, and there's a case of, are they doing the same as me? Is the grass greener somewhere else? We've got to make sure that our legal and policies are strong. So if you have got a home working policy already, I suggest you review it and share it with your people. If you don't have one, then we have a generic one which you'd be more than welcome to have a look at and adapt. I think it's pretty important that people understand exactly what you're expecting of them and what they can expect of you when they're working at home. You know, the kind of practical and legal implications, as well as things like health and safety. Good to have a policy. As I say, if you haven't got one already, let us know. If you have got one, maybe just review it in light of the current situation. Make sure you provide equipment that people need. Difficult, I know now, for us to actually get to people at home, but if they need IT equipment, make sure they've got it, make sure it works. As much as you can, make sure it's set up in a way that is safe for them, and make sure you clarify who's paying for what in terms of expenses. People just need to know, don't they, that there's a process in place, what's going to be covered, what's not going to be covered. And just check things like your insurances with regard to people working at home, and also perhaps their insurances or rental agreements or mortgages with regard to the fact that they are now working at home. We still have, as employers, health and safety obligations, and we need to carry out some kind of a risk assessment. There is a very useful home working questionnaire that's been produced by the CIPD, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. You should be able to access it at their website, which is cipd.co.uk. If you can't, we've got a copy of that and be delighted to share it with you. It's very generic, but it does ask very pertinent questions about the workplace. We've got to make sure as employees that everyone feels the work they're being asked to do at home can be done safely, that they have the right equipment to do it safely, and that leaders and managers are in regular contact with them. If there are reasonable adjustments to be made for people perhaps with a disability, we need to be on top of that one as well. Not forgetting, of course, that our people have responsibilities as well. They have a responsibility to take reasonable care. They need to keep in contact, and they need to identify and wherever possible eliminate any health and safety risks. And the final one, just ensure people understand and meet the data protection principles. I guess one of the risks of people working at home is they will be using different equipment, technological equipment. They may not be able to be part of what you would normally have as an office-based data protection, but make sure people understand that very simple things like maybe using headphones rather than not, so that the rest of the conversation or people in the house can't hear other parts of the conversation, shredding information, and just being aware of the fact that there's greater risk when people are at home than when they're in work. And the final one, and I think this runs through everything that I'm going to cover this morning, I think one of my final takeaways is communicate, communicate, and communicate some more, because particularly when people aren't with us, they need to hear from us, but not just hear from us. They need us to be listening to them. So I'm thinking here communication in the round, not just communication from us out, but from them back to us as well. Try and agree communication methods and regularity that suits the individuals and the teams that you're working with. Now, recognize this will always be a balance, because there may be things that you decide as a business you need to make happen, and that's fair enough. I've got some clients, for example, who are having regular, what they're calling COBRA meetings. I'm not sure where they got that name from. I spoke to a client yesterday, and their senior team are having regular emergency response team meetings. Now, I understand these things might need to happen, but you can still think about the methods and the regularity. And when it comes to, excuse me, other communication, like keep in touch meetings, one-to-ones, then maybe you can agree with individuals which method they would prefer to use and how often, and perhaps even what time of day would be best for them. I'm sure some of you have come across this model before, but remember that communication it's different for everybody, but it covers a whole range of methods, including visual. So people like to see graphics, they like to see drawings, they like to see us as people. There is an auditory element as well, as in we like to hear information, and that information going into our brains through our ears. Some people particularly enjoy reading and writing, so seeing emails, memos. And then there's an element of trying to be kinesthetic, which is people actually get involved in doing things. Now, that can be much more difficult when we're working remotely, but but keep thinking about things like, are there projects that people can get involved with? Are there, can they present to a meeting, so they have to plan, prepare, and deliver something? Or might they take the lead on an element of work that you're doing? Don't rely solely on email. I'm still absolutely shocked. That I spoke to a client last week, and she was actually one of the leadership team of an organization, and we were chatting generally about how the chief executive was communicating in this current circumstance. And the answer was, she's sending out a weekly email. And I thought, okay, weekly email is better than nothing, but what a wasted opportunity, particularly with all the ways we've got to communicate now. So please don't rely solely on email. We know how powerful it can be, but we also know that it's only one very vary, and it can be misunderstood way of communicating. So use as many media as you possibly can. And aren't there a lot of them out there? I'm sure many of you, like me, are now Zoomed, Teamed, GoToMeeting, Skyped out. But they're good and they're very valuable. And I hesitate, or sometimes to think about what we would be like if this had happened 10 years ago without all the technology that we've got. Clearly, we've got to help our people to learn to use them. Some of them will be more competent and confident than others. You may even decide to perhaps buddy people together where you know that somebody is extremely confident and somebody else isn't. But I guess from your point of view, it's a case as a leader perhaps of deciding to some extent, helping people to learn to use them. And I can't emphasize this one anymore, really. Listen to what people are saying, listen to what they're not saying, listen to what they might be showing you from what you're seeing on a screen, and be empathetic. If you've got 20 people in your team or 150 people in your team, they are all going to react differently to the situation they find themselves in. They'll react differently to you. You may not be able to understand their reaction, but we need to listen to it. We need to empathize with it, and we need to help people do their very best to get through this. There are some of the examples, aren't they, of all those wonderful media, and I'm sure, I know we've got Mike on here, who's an expert in this area. I'm sure I've missed half of them off. I was sitting with my youngest daughter having dinner on Sunday. She was asking me what I was doing. I said, it's a development, isn't it? We actually sit down as a family and talk about stuff. We were talking about, and she said, oh, when you talk about all the media, don't forget to mention Mural. And I thought, no, I won't forget to mention Mural. Not that I'd ever heard of it. Or Discord. And then she proceeded to tell me at 17 all the benefits of Mural, which is a whiteboard, a virtual whiteboard, and Discord, which she thinks, of course, is much better than Skype and Zoom and all those other things. One of the areas we're actually looking at within AGP is to maybe have a webinar just focused on these and others that I probably haven't even come across, so that we can maybe explore the benefits and the risks and the disadvantages of using some of these things. And going back to the data protection, some of you may have seen that the Zoom has itself improved its privacy options this weekend just gone. And I'm sure that in part is a reaction to organizations' concerns about data, information, and there were some stories about people perhaps just jumping onto other people's meetings. So it's good to see that the providers are moving to help us in that area. Why use those? Well, the Gallup research says it all really. Our ability to recall things, if they're verbal and visual, is higher, both in the short term and the medium term. So try everything you can to maximize the media. And don't forget, some of you will have come across this wonderful communications pie before. Some work carried out in Los Angeles, which, even if it's only half right, I guess tells us an awful lot, doesn't it? That the words are only 7%, but it's how we say it and our gestures that are very important. And many of you, I guess, have participated in webinars and online meetings, and you can see really how powerful sometimes some of that non-verbal communication is. You have to be very careful on video calls. I think our body language becomes obvious. We've had some cracking issues on our webinars. We've had people who've disappeared, left their chair and forgotten to turn their camera off. So we're actually talking to a chair. We've had some very interesting background conversations when mute has been left on. We had somebody in a kimono who'd obviously forgotten to tie it up very tightly. So we have some very interesting ones. So just be very careful that you hit the mute or hit the video when you're not wanting to communicate. Don't they look a wonderful, happy bunch, just like all of us when we have an online meeting? Just want to spend a few minutes thinking about online meetings. I don't know about in your organization, but in our organization, even face-to-face meetings are sometimes have a poor reputation, but online meetings have a much worse one in that people say they can't work, they don't work, I don't enjoy them, I can't participate, etc. Well, this is where we are. We've got to have them, we're going to have them, and we're going to make them work. First thing I would say is we need to embrace it, and we need to actually make sure our people embrace it and are confident with it. I have said there can be great fun. I mean, I'm not getting out very much at the moment, and neither are you, but I did enjoy last week. We had a team video conference meeting, and it was probably in the last fortnight the time I've laughed most in a course of 10 minutes. They can be great fun, and we've just got to make sure that we adopt the right approach and make them as relaxed as possible while getting the work done. Encourage everyone to use headsets or earphones. I mentioned the security aspect of that, but also it's a much more comfortable experience for all of us, isn't it? Because it will reduce noise, particularly if you're working at home and there are other people around, that you've got a much better chance of being able to focus on the meeting. Make sure, if you haven't already, that you work together to establish some etiquette, some guidelines. For example, one of the huge challenges, I guess, is people talking over each other. So your facilitation skills will be put to the test. Some people have actually worked out some guidelines, maybe based around the talking stick. So whose turn is it to speak next, or who is actually going to be able to provide information that we need on a particular topic. Make sure every meeting you have has a clear purpose and some outcomes, some things that you all agree are important that you're going to achieve during that meeting. Keep any slides that you're using extremely simple and as visual as you can make them. Try and engage everyone regularly. I know it's difficult, but sometimes there are quieter people, obviously, and you know your teams, but sometimes there's a need for you to facilitate, isn't there, by actually maybe throwing out a question and then pausing and directing it to one of the individuals, perhaps who hasn't joined in, or maybe just as part of the conversation saying, Tony, have you got any thoughts on that? Because we need to keep everybody in the loop. And make sure at the end of the meeting, just like you would in a normal meeting when you're face-to-face, that you agree what you've agreed and summarize them. And you know, it's fairly easy, I think, now, isn't it, just to put a quick email out to say, this is what we agreed, this is who's going to do what, and this is by when. Okay, let's move on to managing performance. I think this is one of the most challenging areas of working with people remotely, even in organizations where there's been a flexible approach to home working in the past. The area where it's often fallen down is managers not having the confidence and the trust, almost feeling, if I can't see the chickens laying the eggs, then maybe they're not laying any eggs. An element of presenteeism, I think, whereas now we have not got any choice. We have to make sure that we trust our people. If we set clear objectives, if we monitor performance, there's no reason why we shouldn't trust our people. But it's a fundamental value and behavior that everybody, you and your colleagues, whether they are managers, line managers, team leaders, they've got to trust their people. Make sure you don't assume what can or can't be done remotely. Seen a few examples of this in the last month or so where managers, leaders have said, no, can't do that, it's impossible. But the people, there's a great saying, isn't there, that there's nobody knows more about the job than the person doing it. So don't be afraid to ask people what they think can be done and can't be done remotely before you try and kind of tell them what can be done. review roles and adapt to the situation, that we may be asking people to do things not only in a different way, but perhaps things they haven't done before. But remember, you do it through consultation, through discussion. We're all familiar with this model, I guess, aren't we? But make sure that whatever objectives or outcomes you agree with your people are SMART. Some of them, it depends on the role and what you need done. Some of them may be input-based, as in people need to be doing something at a certain time. But many of them, I suspect, will be output-based. So make sure that, again, we give people as much flexibility as possible, but that they are very clear about how their performance is going to be measured over this period when they're working from home. Notice I've used the word agree a lot in this session so far, and I think that's absolutely fundamental. Treat people as adults, treat them as high performers, and trust them, and they will deliver. Agree monitoring and feedback processes. How much monitoring can they do of their own performance? How will they give you feedback? How will you give them feedback on how they're doing? Schedule regular one-to-ones and keep in touch sessions. So in addition to any online meetings that you might be having, make sure you've got regular one-to-ones, preferably in the diary or in the schedule, as well as some keep in touch sessions. In those sessions, allow plenty of time. I know you're all busy, but I think there's nothing more important than giving people time and giving people room for their feelings. So it's not just talking about their objectives, their outcomes. It's you asking them to tell you how they're feeling at the moment, and maybe exploring things that you can do to support them. Never cancel or postpone those one-to-ones. And be careful, by the way, with the one-to-ones and the keep in touch meetings. I had an email only this morning from a client of mine whose staff are unhappy because they've been holding the keep in touch meetings during their lunch hours. I'm not surprised they're unhappy. I mean, on the one hand, we're kind of telling people we trust them, we want to give them time, we're encouraging them to have some exercise, and then we're saying, hang on a minute, during your lunch hour, we'll have that keep in touch meeting. Just be very careful about what you're doing and how it can be interpreted. And then once you've had these one-to-ones, make sure you record the actions that you've agreed, and make sure you deliver on yours. Because one key element of trust, as we know, is that we deliver on what we say we're going to do. Just a quick reminder, because this SMART model, very, very simple. A lot of organizations, lots of managers use it, but actually aren't very good at setting objectives which are very specific. So I know what they look like, and you know what they look like. They're measurable, they're achievable, they're realistic, and they're time-bound. And time-bound could even be in the next hour, today, this week. It doesn't have to be in the next quarter. Be very focused on setting SMART objectives. And in some organizations, you were thinking, why has he put the jelly baby tree up here? I think in some organizations, it's kind of easy, isn't it, for consultants like me to say, give people room, ask them to tell you how they're feeling. But in some organizations and with some people, that is a very difficult place to go, and it's very unfamiliar. We tend to find that the jelly baby tree, which is this very simple diagram, which many of you may have seen before, is a great way to get insight into how people are feeling, just by asking somebody during their one-to-one, having explained obviously what the jelly baby tree is, to identify the character that best fits their mood. And it isn't to elicit an emotional response, but it's kind of to help people to understand how they are feeling, and why they might be responding to not only the situation, but the work that you're asking them to do in a particular way. And as you can see, some of them, they're so very different, aren't they? I sometimes feel myself that I'm falling off the tree, like on the middle one on the right-hand side. And I certainly find the one who's sitting with his back to everyone else quite interesting. the one hugging the tree, the one climbing, the one helping somebody else, the one generally having fun, I think, on the bottom right, and maybe the one having a doze on the floor on the left. But it's only a simple tool. There are lots of them about, but a way of encouraging people perhaps to open up rather than saying, how are you feeling? And they say, I'm fine. It's just a scratch. So managing performance, absolutely critical. In terms of engaging and motivating people, we've got to recognize, haven't we, that everyone's going to get up in the morning now, hopefully bound onto their desk, office, table, whatever they're going to work on, and work jolly hard for at least 8 hours, taking some regular breaks. But we know that there are going to be times when that's going to be challenging for them, and we're going to have to make sure that we've got the right things going on to motivate them. A couple of thoughts for you. Try and empower people to control their own schedules. Inevitably in your teams, you'll have people with childcare responsibilities and other domestic and family things that they need to deal with, particularly in this current climate. Wherever you can, and I do understand it will be a balance, but wherever you can, enable people and empower people to control their own schedules. So if they want to get up at 6 o'clock and they can do it at 8 o'clock before the kids get up, fantastic. If they need to do it later in the day, try and empower people to control their own schedules with a balance, obviously, and even think about maybe if there are elements of your work, whether you respond to customers and you need to be around a certain, is maybe think about the people in your team for whom that will be much easier than others, and just compromise. Try and encourage active employee communities. So encourage your employees to get together when you're not there, remotely, using things like Facebook, WhatsApp, whatever, just so they are having some space and some time to be social, to have chats, to have some coffee. There's one site that I was looking at the other day called House Party. Now, it depends how friendly everybody is in your team, but House Party seems to be a very social way of people getting together. Encourage people to do that, because they may even need some of that space when you're not around. I think I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Listen, and really listen. Don't listen because I've just got to listen. Don't listen, but actually I'm waiting for what I'm going to say next. Don't listen because I need to get on to do something else. Listen and really listen, and listen with your eyes as well as with your ears. Recognize, praise, and celebrate success. Tell people how well they're doing. Thank them for their work. Recognize them in front of colleagues. If you normally do that kind of thing face to face, do it in the meetings. Praise people when they've done well. Reward them as well. I mean, there are still opportunities for you to perhaps send a card. There are opportunities for you to send a pizza to somebody. There are opportunities to send flowers to people. Just have a think about the innovative ways that you can say thank you and recognize people. Identify and share development opportunities, as well as lots and lots of webinars. One of the things I've certainly been learning over the last few weeks is just what good quality learning opportunities there are out there for people. Things like LinkedIn Learning, where many of the webinars and many of the development opportunities are free. YouTube, as well as webinars. And this is an opportunity, isn't it? Perhaps to explore with people what they'd like to learn and how you can help them learn it without the traditional courses, etc. Try and get feedback from the people in your team. That feedback could be verbal. It could be via something like SurveyMonkey, but that can be a bit kind of time consuming to set up. I've seen clients using two recently, one called Office Vibe and one called Tiny Pulse. These are online platforms where people can be asked questions. They can feed back anonymously, and the whole system gives you a report very, very quickly. Both of them at the moment are offering free trials. So why not use a free trial just to pick up the way in which people are feeling in the organization in a more kind of constructive way, and, as I say, anonymous and very quick. And it might only need to be 1 or 2 questions just to make sure that everybody's feeling okay. And finally, lead by example yourself, isn't it? Even though it's tough sometimes, you're going to have to be upbeat, you're going to have to be positive, you're going to have to be confident that we know where we're going, and we need to support our managers to make sure they can deliver everything we've been talking about this morning so far. Potential good news is, and this is a research exercise carried out in 2019, that where people are happy and comfortable in their work remotely, they actually work very hard. I think they may even work harder than people who are on site. I recognize that this data is based on people who were remote working before the virus and therefore perhaps weren't feeling that they were forced into the situation. But lots of research, probably over the last 5 years or more, does seem to indicate that where people are engaged, where people are motivated, where leaders are doing the right things, remote workers will put the time in and they will work hard. Okay, there is a downside, of course, isn't there? There are some challenges to working at home and being isolated to some extent. We need to think about the health and well-being, not only, as I said earlier, of our people, but of ourselves as well, because even though our people don't think it, I think they need to remember that as leaders, we're people too. And I love this cartoon. And let's hope, isn't it, that as the weeks go on, the government doesn't decide that we can't even get out once a day, which I think would be an unbelievable situation for most of us. But remember, think about not only the psychological well-being, but also the physical well-being of our people, and also the social well-being, which is why I think it's important that we set up these and encourage these social interactions with people which aren't necessarily about work. When people were questioned, and again, these were people who were remote working before the virus, still, I think some interesting ones to look at there. What's your biggest struggle with working remotely? I guess the downside of working more than 40 hours is some people find it very challenging to unplug after work. Those of you, like myself, who've worked remotely for some time know exactly what that looks like, because the laptop's there, the emails are there, and there's a temptation sometimes, even after dinner, to say, oh, I think I'll just sit down and check my emails and do a bit of updating. Feeling lonely, isolated, having difficulties collaborating or communicating, which we've spoken about already. I don't think we have too many problems with the different time zones, but certainly distractions at home will be a challenge for some of us. Staying motivated, taking vacation time or taking holidays, as we say in this country. And as you probably know already, but the government now in the UK has decided that as a temporary new law, employees can carry over up to 4 weeks paid holiday over a 2-year period. For example, because they may have been laid off or furloughed or had to continue working and could not take paid holiday. Some thoughts here, and I'm sorry that one of them's out of date already, and I hope to God it's not going to be further out of date after Thursday, but just some simple things, isn't it, that we need to think about ourselves, but also think about for our people. Start and close the day with a routine. I don't think it means get dressed as in you would normally start to work in your pants, but I have one colleague of mine who religiously for the last 10 years probably, when working at home, actually gets up, has a shave, has a shower, puts a shirt and tie and a suit on, and I'm sure picks up a briefcase and walks into his office. We're all different, aren't we? But think about making that split between not working and working, and get into a routine. Make sure your workstation is set up properly, and it doesn't take a lot of science, does it? The Sunday Times had an article in it on Sunday where it was just saying, if you can't do anything else, put some books under your laptop, so at least your laptop is level with your eyes and your wrists are straight when you're using it. Try and get up every 25 minutes to have a stretch. So if you feel like getting up and having a stretch now, feel free to do it. Find a space away from the main home area if you can. I'm not going to comment on what bedrooms are for, but regular breaks and exercise. Again, the 25-minute rule: stretch, breathe, keep hydrated, try and minimize distraction. Socialize, already mentioned that one, socialize with other people. We can't physically do it by Zoom or Skype or any other method. Try and get out, and this is which has changed already, hasn't it? Ideally once a day now for us to get out and do some exercise. It's absolutely amazing to see how many people now are walking, cycling, running, and just getting out as a family for a stroll every day. Think about your food, and it doesn't say it on here, but I'm going to say it. Think about your alcohol intake as well. Lots of people I've spoken to, both at home and in work, are saying that for whatever reason they're eating much more. They're eating much more, and they're eating much worse things than they would normally eat. I don't know if that's because the temptation of the fridge being in the house is too much. I certainly have found that maybe I'm having a glass of wine more often than I would normally. So I've got to get that in check as well. Remember to communicate, and remember to monitor how people are doing. And remember to apply all of these to you as well. Okay, finally, whatever you take away from this, remember to lead your people with clarity and consistency. They need it. They deserve it, and it's going to set the tone, I think, for how we continue to work once this crisis has passed. Communicate, communicate, and communicate some more. The 3 C's of communication. You cannot do too much of it, but don't think of communication as you telling people things. There will be things you need to tell them, but make sure they are involved both as individuals and as teams in communicating with you, and that you're listening. Manage performance positively, so build trust both ways. Make sure that you expect people to perform and to achieve a high level of output rather than the other way around, and it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Remember to show empathy for people. They will all deal with this situation differently. There'll be some people will respond to it in ways you cannot understand or fathom, and you would say, I would never behave in that way myself, but that's what's going to happen. Support your people to grow into this new way of working, because it looks like whichever news article you listen to, it's going to be another couple of months at least. So we need to get people into this new habit and way of working. Empower people as much as you can. Give them latitude, give them freedom, and enable them to make decisions, albeit in the context of what needs to be done. And encourage people to talk openly about both their physical and mental health. And wherever you can, support them. Some of you may have external counsellors you can refer people to, but even if you've got people internally, make sure that we're listening and we're looking to respond and help people deal with whatever they're going through. And finally, deliver on your promises. And kind of have some fun in all this as well. Enjoy it. Look at it as a challenge. Look at it that I think all of us are going to come out of this as better leaders, better managers, and probably better able to not only engage and motivate our people when they work remotely, but also when they get back into the workplace. As I said, I've put some links in for you on this, and we've also got the resources I mentioned as I went through, both in terms of the working at home questionnaire and the home working policy. So if you have if you want either of those, just let Lisa and I know, and we'll get them to you. Okay, that's the end of me talking to you. I'm sorry it took so long, but have we got any questions, Lisa?
There's nothing on the chat unless anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask away. They're welcome to. Which I'm guessing not.
They've all gone.
You obviously did such a fabulous presentation there, Howard. They've left them with no questions. It's all covered.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I think they're good to go.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for spending time with us this morning. I know Lisa's got a few bits and pieces to finish off now, but thank you all. Good luck with this. It's not easy, but I'm sure you'll rise to the challenge and get the very best out of your people.
There we are. You got just to say very comprehensive and just the job and all understood. So obviously a good presentation. Anyone asking for the slides? Yes, you can have them, but we need your signature back. So as soon as I get off the phone now, I'll start sending through the emails with your surveys, and the signature to say that you attended. As soon as I get that back from you, then I can send out the slides to anybody who wants them. So I'll sort that out for you, but obviously we need your signatures back first. So that's not a problem after that. Can I have the homework and assessment link, please? Was that the links you've just put on, Howard, a couple of things ago, was that?
Yeah, I'll make sure we get that.
And the policy mentioned, yeah. So I think it's just people asking for your policies, basically.
Brilliant.
So
and if you get time, have a look at the links. They're all very practical. They're bang up to date, and they've got some very useful hints and tips there that I'm sure you'll find beneficial.
We can send those out. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Howard.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.
We'll
have a great day and enjoy the sunshine, even if you're only looking out the window.
Yeah.